Sanibonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 198 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. We're doing a small countdown, a rather big countdown to episode 200. We're certainly looking forward to bringing you the 200th episode of the Private Property Podcast. For all the brand new viewers, you've missed out on quite a lot of great content that we have brought to your screen. So do make sure that you go to our Facebook or YouTube page to catch up on some of the great property content that we have brought to your screens. And to our regular viewers, welcome back. As usual, we're always live every weekday at 7 p.m. with myself, Zama Khumalo, and the rest of the team, where we tackle hot property topics that help us on our property journey. We want to make sure that we make the right property decisions and empower ourselves with the right knowledge in order to grow our property portfolios as much as possible. And if you're not growing your portfolio, perhaps you're buying your primary residence or you're even a tenant, this is still the show for you, because we'll also cover issues around making sure that you have a good relationship with your landlord, or if you're a landlord, how to have that good relationship with your tenant, and of course help you on that first purchase. And talking about the first purchase, you can also tune into the First Time Home Buyers Show with ST Claassen that comes to your screens every single Wednesdays at 8 p.m. And Umbali Nogo every Tuesdays and Thursdays brings you the Farming Podcast. So you can look forward to that just this evening after this podcast. And of course, she tackles various issues that have to do with agriculture. So if you have green fingers or you've always wanted to get into agriculture, then that is the show that you want to make sure you never miss. And if you're in the market, perhaps you want to buy in a complex, in an estate, then make sure to tune into the Home Shoppers Show with Chad over the weekend, and he gives you a snapshot of what you can expect from some of the best complexes and estates around the country. But we definitely do have quite a lot on offer for you here on Private Property and across our social media platforms. Absolutely love hearing from you. So always do share some, give us some love, whether it is in the lives that we always bring to your screens. Of course, the different other content that we bring. And we are, of course, running a great competition, because this is also one of those things that we love doing, which is doing giveaways and making sure that we spread a little bit of joy, especially because a lot of people have an interest in property, probably want to, make a little bit of extra money on the side. And how you get to participate in this competition that we're running this year, or certainly to kickstart 2021. We're doing the Sherlock Holmes competition, and you can go to www.privateproperty.co.za and crack the riddle that we have for this fourth week. We're going to be running this competition for the next 12 weeks. We've already had 3 weeks and really great winners who are able to crack the riddle. And this week's riddle is one that I think is very easy. I think the team probably was in a loving mood because we're going to Valentine's Day over the weekend. And the riddle is: just inland from the mother city, in a student town that grows wine, you'll find the 3 rooms to play in a secure estate that's well gevaarden. And that is the riddle for this fourth week of the Sherlock Holmes competition. And something else that we've added to the Sherlock Holmes competition to just make things a little bit spicy is that we have a spot prize every Wednesdays and Thursdays where we give away 500 Rand in cash. And the only way to win that is you have to have entered the competition, but you also have to be watching us live so that you can raise your hand should we call your name out. So that is how you can win with us here on Private Property, whether you're entering to win that 5,000 Rand voucher on Friday, or of course stand a chance of walking away with the 500 Rand spot prize. There's always something that we're giving away and something that we love sharing with you at home. Now, one of the things that I'm quite excited about this evening's conversation, we've got a guest, who's an industry leader. We've had him before. And one of the things that we really want to make sure is that very early on in the year, we have a very good understanding of perhaps some of the property trends that we can look forward to in 2021 this year, and be able to make the best decisions going forward. And I think one of the big things is also us being able to reflect a little bit on 2020 trends and how some of them may perhaps spill into 2021. And we are, of course, exploring real estate trends to look out for with Pam Golding. And my guest this evening is Dr. Andrew Golding, who's the Chief Executive at Pam Golding Properties. Andrew, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening, and thanks for having me on the show.
It's so great to have you again, Andrew. I think one of the big things with this evening's conversation that I think I want our viewers to be able to get a big sense of is when you look at property from maybe even when you're a newcomer, or certainly from some of the more seasoned investors. One of the big things is last year, quite a lot happened. And of course, it happened across various industries. Property was also affected. So before we even look at some of the 2021 trends and what we can expect and what different players can look forward to, for example, your renters, your buyers, your sellers, I actually want us to reflect a little bit on 2020 trends that probably surprised you, especially given the activity that we had in COVID-19 and how the industry was ultimately affected.
Yeah, so I think if one looks back at February last year, in other words, before the pandemic, we were in a particular environment, relatively high interest rates, a property market that was probably sort of going sideways, an economy that wasn't looking particularly bright. And then we encountered this pandemic and the subsequent lockdown, and none of us knew what was going to happen after the lockdown. I think there was a sense that the property market, may well go into free fall, that the industry might well be in significant trouble. Immediately after lockdown, we came out and the market was pretty strong. Most people attributed that to pent-up demand from the 2 months where there'd been no trading. But I think what became apparent very quickly after that was that we had in fact entered a new trend in the market, a new set of circumstances, fundamentally fueled and catalyzed by the low interest rate environment that we suddenly found ourselves in. And a whole lot of new trends materialized really from July all the way through until now. I think predominantly that was interest rate fueled. We certainly saw the opportunity for first-time home buyers and generally the home buying public having a look at what a mortgage was going to cost them. Generally speaking, at least 70% of what they would have ordinarily paid. And I think that certainly was one of the major catalysts. We also saw all of the trends that are associated with the pandemic having an effect on the housing market. So suddenly the work from home environment created a requirement for more people to potentially need more space at home. We saw the emergence of so-called Zoom towns, where people are able to live and work remotely and choose lifestyle locations. So suddenly seaside locations or second home locations, which were generally speaking holiday home destinations, suddenly became attractive primary destination opportunities where people were able to live and work from that perspective. In the metro environments, we saw another series of shifting trends where previously commuting time and commuting distances became a very important criteria for home buyers to consider. Now suddenly with the work from home environment, the commuting requirements were vastly changed. And I think we'll talk about that in 2021 as something that potentially could be a significant change in what we're seeing. Overall, we've seen a very active market across the board, predominantly in the under 2 million rand category, so between 1 and say 2.5 million rand. That was certainly the most active market. The top end of the market, I think, was not surprisingly much slower, but there have been some transactions there. And in terms of house price growth, while the interest rates were low, I think there was a price correction across the board, and that also encouraged buyers to get in against what they saw as opportunistic buying opportunities. And again, that fueled trade. In the rental market, initially there was a sense that landlords needed to come to the party quite significantly and assist tenants who were potentially in trouble. There was obviously significant job losses and a need for there to be a consideration for tenants that were taking strain. And I think that the rental market has also entered into a very new and interesting phase, given the low interest rate environments for buyers, the competition for tenants in that space, where tenants potentially have a choice around buying and or renting. And so all of those trends are, I think, making up the environment that we find ourselves in now at the beginning of 2021 as we head into this new 12-month period.
And, I think, Andrew, one of the big things with last year's activity for so many people, and you mentioned it earlier on, was when we saw the initial 21 days, and of course the lockdown got extended, there certainly were certain people who thought that there might be, the market might free fall and it would almost be a bit of a free for all in terms of property. And I'm sure many property investors who already had property were quite happy that something like that didn't happen, and that the industry is resilient enough to have not only sort of gone through that phase, but also picked up as significantly as it did. Because one of the very big things that's happened, and this has come out from every guest that I've had, whether they, working for an agency or they're transferring attorneys, is that there was more activity than what they anticipated, especially when you look at the last 2 quarters of 2020. And a lot of people thought, that first quarter, as the restrictions were slowly easing, they tested activity to the pent-up demand. But anything after that, they thought perhaps it would go back to sort of pre-lockdown numbers, but it didn't. A lot of them talk about how they had record sales and continue to have quite high sales well into December. I think, do you see a trend like that staying on for 2021? I mean, we've seen quite a lot of stock going onto the market. Some buyers certainly letting go of some of their some of the properties in their portfolio. What's your take on the activity that we've seen, and maybe it's almost slowly going down and stabilizing?
Yeah, so I think our take on the market is that, generally speaking, the South African market is heavily influenced by the interest rate environment. Our sense is that the interest rate environment, certainly for the foreseeable future, is going to stay more or less in the band that it's in at the moment, and that therefore that will continue to be attractive to the market and continue to fuel the activity that we've seen in essentially the middle and lower end of the market. And so we see that trend continuing. We also see the trends that have been influenced by the pandemic around the work from home situation, the remote work environment, and other COVID-related trends continuing. I think it's going to take seemingly quite a long time, probably the balance of this year, for meaningful vaccination to take place in the country. And as a consequence, therefore, we think that most of the work-related trends are going to continue. And so really, although we are seeing both stock shortages in some parts of the market, but in other parts of the market, sufficient stock, we do see that, generally speaking, unless there is a significant external shock that's not foreseen at the moment, that the market will continue in the way that it has, perhaps not quite at the pace that it was at towards the last calendar quarter of last year, but certainly still a buoyant market from the point of view of transactional volume. I think the big question is the extent to which the South African residential market, either generally or in terms of various specific segments, is going to start to show positive house price growth, which certainly wasn't the case last year. So if anything, house price growth was flat. There was volume, but there wasn't house price growth. And I think that's really the big question as to whether we're going to start to see some dynamic change in the supply and demand characteristics of the market and the start of a price appreciation situation again. I think it's going to take some time, maybe in the third quarter, depending on how the economy performs, which looks like it's going to be in positive territory once we start to get the stimulus packages that I think everyone is looking for and hopefully we're going to get. And perhaps that's going to be the start of another price appreciation curve. But for now, and certainly the first couple of quarters of the year, we see the current circumstances continuing.
I'm in conversation this evening with Dr. Andrew Golding, who's the Chief Executive at Pam Golding Properties, and we're looking at real estate trends to look out for in 2021. We've been reflecting a bit about 2020 and some of the activity that we saw in 2020, and I think one of the big things about 2020 is you want to be able to make the best informed decision, whether you're a first-time home buyer or even a more seasoned property investor. And you want to be able to look at where the data is, especially in the area that you're particularly interested in, and not only looking at, for example, what purchase prices are, but also looking at the rental that that particular area is able to, currently attract. And that's where I want us to go, Andrew, for this part of our conversation. And to our viewers at home, you're able to, send through your questions and comments about some of your predictions about 2021. We've already had, I think, a relatively good start to the year. I'm seeing still quite a significant amount of activity, and even with the various people that we've had on the show. And I think one of the big things, Andrew, that I actually want us then to speak about is when we look at 2021 and perhaps some of the trends that you predict may some stick from 2020 or perhaps even arise. Let's perhaps look at what the rental market is potentially going to look like. I think before we look at the buy and sell side, because there's been relatively interesting dynamics where rental is concerned, with some areas obviously having very high vacancies, other areas still having relatively the same vacancy as pre-COVID. We've seen that certain price points have had to almost be adjusted slightly lower. What do you predict when it comes to some of the rental trends for 2021?
So I think we're still going to see a very active rental market. There's no doubt that there is still significant demand. I think in terms of rental yields for landlords, those are probably going to remain in the territory that they're in at the moment, which has been under some pressure. Obviously, like all property markets, there are many different segments and many different factors that influence the particular markets that we're talking about. So the top end of the market obviously differs from the middle, which differs from the lower end of the market. And obviously, there are many geographical differences. But generally speaking, I think we see a continuation of the current trend, which is that tenants probably have the upper hand. There is probably a slight excess in terms of stock. That rental yields are under some pressure, but generally we see that situation improving gradually over the course of the year. And obviously some of the tenants that ordinarily would be renting have been able to transition across into becoming purchasers as a consequence of the low interest rate environment.
And I think it's definitely one of those things, Andrew, that we even spoke about quite a lot last year. And I think if anything, the very first episode that we had of the Private Property Podcast was on the conversation that both landlord and tenant need to be having. We're looking at the fact that we're about to have a 21-day lockdown, meaning that some of the tenants' income was probably going to be affected and they probably weren't going to be able to make rent for that particular month. How does a landlord and their tenant start having that conversation in order to reach the middle ground? And I think when you then look at what's happened over the months last year, as you say, you definitely do end up with a situation where, for the most part, renters have a slight upper hand, because when you look at the rental market, there is quite a lot of stock available right now. So they're able to kind of shop around for which place they have. And I've seen quite a lot of them even negotiating rental just slightly lower than the advertised price. So I want us then, Andrew, to transition to trends that you predict for 2021 when it comes to buyers as well as sellers. Because I think one of the things that you're saying is how, in as much as last year we saw a lot of volume in terms of sales, there wasn't that much, appreciation. And I know that we've certainly seen this where when you go into privateproperty.co.za, some of the properties that are listed, I've even found properties that are now listed at a higher price than pre-lockdown. And with many of them, you can say, well, they're chancing because it's just going to stay on the market for a longer period. But we certainly have seen quite a bit of those. quite a bit of that in different price points. I mean, obviously, by the time the sale happens, the price might be significantly different. But I think one of the things that we're definitely seeing is some sellers wanting to ask for a higher price because they themselves also use the rationale that interest rates are historically low. Therefore, the potential buyers out there will be able to afford this particular property. So what are some of the 2021 trends that you're predicting for, or foreseeing rather, for when it comes to buyers as well as sellers?
So I think in terms of house prices per se, there was unquestionably a reset as there was in the rental environment. I think it's important to reflect on the fact that none of us knew how this market was going to play out during the course of the first lockdown, and effectively for many people our first experience of a global pandemic. So I think the circumstances immediately after the lockdown are very different to the circumstances now. I think both in the rental market and in the sales market, things have settled down. I think they've reached a new normal, which is effectively an equilibrium from which new trends will potentially develop. So I think, in terms of house prices, it really does depend. There's no doubt that correctly priced homes are selling easily and quickly, but the converse is true, which is that incorrectly priced homes are sitting on the market and are not selling. So the market has, for all intents and purposes, in many locations, and not every location, but in many locations, reset itself during the course of last year. Some markets definitely needed to reset. They were too high relative to the demand and the affordability of that particular area. And that wasn't necessarily a COVID issue. That was a more of a market-related pre-COVID issue. But having reset those markets, they then were at the correct levels, and they were at the levels that buyers were prepared to pay in terms of seeing value and a willing buyer and willing seller transaction. And I think that that's going to continue. I certainly don't see house price growth accelerating dramatically over the course of the year. And if inflation and the economy are growing at somewhere around 3 or 4%, then I would imagine that that's probably the kind of house price growth and house price inflation we could expect, rather than any of the previous numbers which were significantly above that. So generally speaking, I think we're going to continue to see keen pricing between buyers and sellers, realistic homes selling well, and correctly priced homes selling quickly.
And I think that's one of the big things for viewers at home who are looking to put their property on the market to sell. And it's been echoed, Andrew, even towards, the tail end of last year from different guests, that if you price your property well, it will sell, and it will sell quickly. They tend to find that we do have quite a lot of active buyers right now who are looking for good value for money. And this isn't, only property investors, but people who are looking to either downgrade, or others who are looking to upgrade because they can now afford a slightly more expensive home. So the big thing, if you're wanting to sell this year, is to price your property well, especially if you wanted to, to sell quickly, as opposed to it staying on the market for an extended period. Now, Andrew, one of the big things with the Private Property Podcast is, of course, we've got a lot of property investors, people who are always looking to grow their property portfolio. What are some of the trends that you foresee for 2021 that would be particularly useful for those who are property investors and are looking to grow their respective portfolios?
Yeah, so I think like with every piece of property advice, the location is absolutely critical. So I think it's very important to choose areas in the country which are attractive if people are looking to buy to let. I think the inner city buy to let opportunity is one that's interesting right now, because the dynamics have changed in terms of commuters. So there may be opportunities there in terms of pricing resets and an improvement in rental yields. And then in terms of house price growth and capital appreciation, if that's an investor's outlook, then, as I mentioned earlier, there are a number of areas in the country which 12 months ago were not seen as high demand areas. So, for example, coastal towns like Hermanus, like Knysna, like Plettenberg Bay have certainly enjoyed really exceptional demand off the back of the changing dynamic of these Zoom towns. So small town South Africa represents, I think, a fantastic opportunity. And obviously areas outside of the individual metros, which again were probably seen as secondary because of the commuting distance, now also have a significant attractiveness in terms of price, given their location and their distance from the center of the metro. But now where people have the ability to live and work in the same location, the whole notion of live, work, and play has changed dramatically as a consequence of the potential need not to have to drive into work every day.
And I think that's going to be such a big one, Andrew, because I'm seeing even with renters right now, when they're looking for a place to move into, they're taking into consideration whether or not they'll be able to work from that particular place. So people who, for example, previously may have rented a 1-bedroom are now looking at a 2-bedroom, just so they can also have, what a study of sort. Because I think many of us were caught off guard with not having a study in our homes, and you're having to do Zoom in your bedroom or in your lounge. And so increasingly, even the way that we're looking at spaces that we want to rent into, we understanding that it's important to us, for example, is there fiber? Because of course, data costs are so high. So you're also just asking about those amenities that are going to make it so much easier for you to be able to effectively work from home. Now, Andrew,
Yeah.
before we close, you wanted to just say something, Andrew?
No, just in terms of the space issue, I think it's very relevant. There's no doubt that there have been dramatic changes in people's needs, and that has certainly fueled the market. Unfortunately, in some cases, there have been instances where people have needed less space because of the financial difficulties they've had. And so both of those have, in fact, been a dynamic that's been fueling the market in terms of transactions.
And Andrew, before we close off this evening, I think any last certainly tip for our viewers at home when it comes to making the best property decision, bearing in mind what's happened sort of in 2020 and some of your, I'll say, outlook for what is potentially going to be coming on in 2021?
Yeah, so I think probably the best piece of advice I can give is to really do your homework. The market is always fluid, it's always changing. Information is readily available and data is readily available, and it's really important to make use of that information so that you can make the best possible decision. Also, the real estate industry and the real estate professionals are a ready source of that information, and so they are available for the public to use for that purpose. And so again, I would urge everyone who's serious about property investment to choose a professional and a credible real estate professional to ensure that they get the best possible advice and therefore make the best possible decisions about whatever it is they're looking to do in the industry.
And we've got a question here coming through from YouTube. It is from Moses Juma, who asks, I'm a foreigner married to a South African and we live in Dubai. We bought an investment property in Cape Town on a cash basis. My question is it possible to get a bond for our second investment property at 100% using our current property as a guarantee?
So I think it's going to depend on the particular circumstances of what the family have in terms of their current environment. I think he said it was a cash deal. As a South African, potentially there is an opportunity, depending on the lady's residential status or resident status, as to how the banks will view that. And in addition, there's obviously the opportunity of an interbank loan with him being a foreigner. So there are a number of opportunities for them to be able to mortgage a second property, but it depends on the particular circumstances of where they are seen to be tax domiciled and where their resident status is.
And Andrew, I'll actually squeeze in one last question that's almost based off the back of this one, which is around international investors. I think one of the big things with international investors when it comes to investing in property in South Africa is they do tend to find it to be typically priced less than what they would find in their respective countries, and they're generally quite spoiled for choice. Where do you see some of the activity when it comes to 2021 in the way that foreign investors are going to look at property investment in South Africa?
So, I think the foreign investor question is a very interesting one. Obviously, with travel being so constrained, there's been a dramatic increase in the number of foreign visitors. Although, having said that, South Africa continues to be extremely attractive to foreigners who know the country and who are very keen in this COVID environment to relocate here. So we've actually seen quite a lot of interest recently, and across the board, from the top end of the market all the way to the lower end. So we expect that to continue. There are a number of different parts of the world that continue to find South Africa attractive. We have a big African contingent who continually look to invest in South Africa. But generally speaking, the foreign component of the overall market is a very tiny part of our market, probably about 1% of the total number of sales. But that's across the whole board. But in certain specific locations, that number is significantly higher, and foreigners make up a very important part of certain markets. And that is a trend that we think will continue, particularly given the attractiveness of South Africa, the relative safety in terms of COVID and the number of infections compared to some other parts of the world, and of course the other appeal in terms of climate and cost of living. So we do expect that as soon as the markets open up, from a travel point of view, that we'll continue to see increasing number of foreigners investing in South Africa.
And Andrew, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing really great insights on what we can look forward to in 2021.
That's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And that is Dr. Andrew Golding, who is the Chief Executive at Pam Golding Properties. And that, of course, wraps up episode 198 of the Private Property Podcast. But as you know, because it's a Thursday, we're not quite done. We're going to go for a quick break. And when we come back, we will be announcing the lucky winner of that 500 Rand spot prize. And of course, you have to be watching us live. So don't hop off the live so that in the event where we call your name out, you're able to raise your hand. We're going to go for a quick break and we'll be back just after this. Welcome back to the Thursday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Zama Khumalo. Well, it is that time of the evening where we get to give away the 500 Rand spot prize for our Sherlock Holmes competition. And the only catch to winning this particular prize is that you need to be watching us live. And if we call your name, message us down here below. I'm going to give you a minute in order for you to message us, and then you get to walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize. It's that simple. I mean, it's pre-Valentine's Day. Maybe you can even buy your partner a little something for Valentine's Day. And the potential lucky winner of the 500 Rand spot prize this evening goes to Tiffany Robin Miller. That is Tiffany Robin Miller. If you're watching us, please message us down here below. I'm going to give you a minute for you to send us that message. That's Tiffany Robin Miller, who potentially is going to walk away with that 500 Rand cash prize. We've actually been very fortunate. Every time since we started the spot prizes, the lucky winner has been watching us live and has been able to text us down here below and say that I'm watching, which of course is fantastic because it's literally that easy to be able to walk away with that spot prize. And I see there's a message there from Jordan Lee Dylan Vera. Is that the same person? I entered and I'm here. I'm just going to wait for the team to just verify, because the name that I have is Tiffany Robin Miller, but I see down there it's just the name that they've written that they showed is slightly different. So I'm going to give it another minute just for the team to verify. I know sometimes people log in with a different account. Maybe you live at home with your partner, and the one day you watch us with, the one account, and the following day you watch us with your partner's account. Because like we like saying, make the property circle bigger. Invite your friends and family to watch in on the live. If you're already tuning in at 7 o'clock, you may as well rope in your partner, because you want to make sure that your partner also is able to get the property knowledge that you get, maybe even your children if they're old enough. So I'm going to give that one a quick minute just for the team to verify that that is in fact the right person. I don't want us to move to potentially the next person only to find that they're probably watching from a partner's Facebook account. So I will just give that a few minutes. And of course, if you want to be like Tiffany, is that you need to be able to enter the Sherlock Holmes competition. And that is a competition that we're running for the next 12 weeks across our social media platforms as well as on our website. So do make sure that you go on to www.privateproperty.co.za. Now, I have received confirmation from one of my team members saying that unfortunately Tiffany has not in. So Tiffany Robin Miller, unfortunately, is not in the live and has not been able to identify themselves. And so the potential, let's see, must I run it? Must I go to the next person, or maybe we must do a rollover? I think we'll do a rollover. We're going to do a rollover for when we do it next week. So that's going to be next week, Wednesday. The person who's potentially going to walk away with the spot prize is going to walk away with 1,000 rands. So I think we'll do that just because I'm feeling spicy. It is pre-Valentine's Day, and maybe somebody must just recover from the Valentine's Day surprise that they're going to do for their partner. So next week, Wednesday, the cash prize amount is going to be 1,000 Rand. We're going to roll it over because we couldn't, because Tiffany wasn't watching us live this evening. Well, folks, that's it from me, Zama Kumalo, and the rest of the Private Property Podcast team. It has been a pleasure to be with you this evening, and I'm going to now hand over to Umbalu Noko for the Farming Podcast.
Besides the beautiful beaches, sunny skies and how central everything is, what I really love about Umhlanga is the people. You can't help but become immersed in the culture, and you'll find people connecting in the most authentic spaces. It's just got this vibe to it. It's hard to think that only a few years ago, these business parks and homes were mostly sugarcane. The rate that this area has been developed at is truly mind-blowing. Especially with the fast pace of life these days, we really pride ourselves in being that bright spot in a person's day. You'll see everything from advocates and CEOs to creatives and students who pop into our spot for that short moment to escape. There's just so much life and energy in this area, and after a hectic week, there's nothing better than stopping in at Mount Edgecombe Country Club for a relaxed round of golf. The beauty and serenity that the estate offers really inspires me. There's honestly no place I'd rather live. That's my Umhlanga.